Hello and welcome back to Corvinus Business Intelligence, a podcast of Corvinus University here in beautiful Budapest. I'm Theodore Boone and I am on the faculty of Corvinus University. And we're absolutely delighted to have with us today Julianna Nagy, a senior manager at KPMG who is responsible for sustainability. And we're going to be covering issues related to sustainability and ESG. And don't worry if you're not quite sure what ESG means or stands for is about, because we're going to talk about that as well. And may I say, Julianna, welcome today. It's just fantastic to have you. I look forward to learning a lot. Let me actually just start with that essential question. You hear ESG, succinctly, what does it mean?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think this is something that we have to, set the record straight about ESG, because ESG is a little bit different than sustainability. Whereas sustainability is a notion that we know, about our economic studies, ESG is rather a metric that was defined to kind of understand and try to measure a company's non-financial attributes and try to measure and understand a company's performance from a non-financial perspective.
And how does that measurement go about? What kind of factors are looked at?
It's basically similar to the idea of sustainability. So ESG is E stands for environment, S social, and G stands for governance. So from the environmental perspective, there are many underlying KPIs, for example, GHG emission or electricity usage, etc. Or in social aspects, we see and check, for example, the own workforce-related issues and thematics. And in governance, obviously, the internal transparency or the business ethics, for example, of a company.
Let me take an example, and I apologize, it's going to be a really simple example,
Yeah.
but a company that sorts their waste by, like we have here at Corvinus, we have a basket for plastic, a basket for, I guess, paper, and then a mix basket. I assume a company that does that is going to rate higher than a company that just has a bin. Is that fair enough?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, ESG is not a winning or a losing competition. So basically, ESG rating would be that, where companies by a certain methodology would get a rating or a score, or they get like a refrigerator, A or B classification. Yeah. In ESG, or as far as the European Commission defined in the European standard, there is a standard for that. Basically, it's a retrospective measurement of the company, so there is no good or bad. There is, or they hope that the companies will be comparable to each other. So you are not losing or winning in the game, but you can be better or be better from the others who are in the same, for example, sector as you are.
So let's stick with the E for a minute, environment. Some companies that are at or near the top of the line on the E, what kinds of things are they doing?
I mean, there are front runners who are already started to measure and deal with the E aspects. So their global GHG emission, or the usage, or waste management. But I think what needs to be put in place here also is that the companies are not necessarily needed to deal with these topics. Each and every company should deal with only the material topics that are, important from their business perspective. So those companies who have a high impact on the environment or climate change, for example, they started to develop their green transition, so reducing their, for example, fuel-based emission or input usage, or they started to work on their waste management, etc. But this is, there is no example for that, what they start. Biggest companies that are more related to and need to work on their system change, they started to change their own business processes. So, for example, like an oil and gas company should start to think about how they would phase out this business practice and change it to something that they, for example, use renewables instead.
And I'm going to ask kind of a cynical question. I don't necessarily believe what is standing behind this question, but if you have a company who basically believes their fundamental goal is to be profitable as possible within the boundaries of the law, why should the company care about ESG?
I think at the moment, companies are struggling with this, by the way. Many CEOs and CFOs I'm talking to are asking the same questions. Why do I need to care about? And what I see at the moment is more like a regulatory burden or like a compliance question. But what we see from KPMG's perspective that if you are on the front run and deal with these issues on time, you at the moment definitely will win or become more competitive. Also, for example, from an investor perspective, your company as a whole will be more advantageous getting better investments, for example.
Say if you're a publicly listed company, do certain investors look for certain ESG ratings when they're considering whether to invest or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
All right, let's talk about the S a little bit. Could you give some examples of issues that are relevant in the S of the ESG?
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about S, so we don't talk about society, but the social aspect of a company is the existence, basically, of the company. So first of all is the own workforce-related issues. So adequate wages, equal opportunity, health and safety issues, for example, and questions. But also what's really interesting, that companies should not just think about their own operations, but they have to think about their value chain as well. So in this aspect, if a value chain is really like material and the questions are material for the company, they have to also check these questions within their value chain. Again, child labor, forced labor, etc.
So one thing I want to understand a little bit better is, of course, there are laws against child labor. There are laws against certain types of pollution. You can't just go out in the back lot and dump nasty stuff in the ground. But with ESG, then, the question would be to go above and beyond what is required as the law. The law is sort of the baseline, and then what else are you going to do? Is that a fair way of putting it?
I would say yes, and what we see and how we perceive, or at least I perceive, is that the regulator want to kind of use the companies as a sort of a front runner and push down on the value chain their effects. So if a large company has a large effect on their, for example, suppliers, they can have an effect on them and require them to be more like, knowledgeable and more careful about these risks within their working environment.
Yeah, so just to be clear, if you're a big construction company, for example, and you're purchasing a lot of materials or you have a lot of subcontractors, what you're saying is that construction company should be or could be insisting, even in its contracts, certain ESG requirements.
Yes, definitely.
So on the S, what would be some examples of some things that companies could or might do to get a higher rating beyond what the law requires?
I think at the moment for suppliers, the baseline is the regulatory requirement. But for example, they can definitely showcase that they have certain programs within their system, whether, towards their workers, for example, or they have a sort of an understanding of their workers and they take care of their workers, for example. And if they can showcase these programs, etc., and show it to their vendors, then it could be a good point.
And the vendors, I guess, if the company wanted to play a hardball, it would just say, hey guys, you got to do this or we're going to look somewhere else.
Yeah, this is what we see at the market. So
and
this
companies
is
are doing that.
Yeah, it's beginning. It's really at the beginning, but larger companies, especially international, worldwide companies, they started to ask and give like a sort of a mandate. So, okay, you have 1 year to comply with my requirements. But I would say that it's not really on the social side. The main pressure is on GHG emission at the moment. So, for example, just not the target. So they don't necessarily ask, okay, reduce your GHG emission by 30%, for example, but they want you to
help our listeners out. GHG meaning what?
Is the greenhouse gas emission.
Yeah, the carbon
emission, basically the carbon emission, but there are many other factors in this. But so they don't want you to, okay, have a emission reduction target that would be in 2-3 years time. But first they just want you to be able to give the data.
To just be able to measure it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to give the information, okay, I am conscious about it, I measure this, and I can report to you. And if you tell me, okay, together, for example, companies, large companies, they already have reduction targets. First, they say, okay, my target for my own operation, I'm going to be net zero by 2030. But then there are companies who are already starting to say, okay, I will green and make net zero supply chain as well. Then they're going to push their suppliers to do the same.
And sorry, help me out and maybe some of our listeners. I hear this term net zero a lot. Yeah. Can you just define it for me?
Yeah, it's basically to reduce their GHG emission as much as possible, but we all know that it's not 100% reachable targets, so they can also offset or do other activities that basically, balance their emissions out.
So you reduce as much as possible, and then you do some offsets in theory to get it to the zero.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the G. Does it stand for good, great?
What is it?
Governance. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, as I told you, ESG is a metric for companies. So whereas in sustainability, we talk about economy, in case of ESG, we talk about the internal governance system of a company. So, for example, the code of conduct, the business ethic, how the business is actually, making decisions, how openly they make decisions. These are all questions that needs to be put out. And I think this is something that is really new to the companies. Not every company is ready to do that. And also, to be able to talk to your employees about this.
So you might say in a way the word transparency is also used that relates to it. So let me ask you a question there. Let's say you're a privately held company. You're not a public company. You're a large family company. To my knowledge, other than legal requirements, you don't need to be transparent. The family gets around the table and maybe the matriarch makes the decision and the rest of the family says yes or however, and everything stays around the table with the family. Is that for a privately held company? Is that okay or not or what?
I think there is no, again, bad or good,
Yeah.
I think it's about best practices. And if the company is structured in a way, what you said, that it's a family company and they have their decision-making processes, it's fine. But they just have to say, okay, these are my processes. So
let me ask you another question on compensation levels, right? Some companies, that information's tightly held. Nobody has a clue what anybody else is making at the company. Maybe other companies, it's a little bit more transparent.
Yeah.
Is the G saying companies should be transparent, that everybody should know what everybody else is making, or not?
I'm not sure that it's a G saying, but there is an EU regulation that is coming up that will require European companies to publish this. So it's kind of...
Really? For non-public companies,
yes,
you have to publish salaries of...
From 2 years now. In our job descriptions, when we are hiring people, we have to do a section, okay, what we are supposed to, what we are planning to give the future employee. And also we have to publish the salary ranges per functions, actually. So this is coming, and this is not part of G. G is basic. So ESG, again, it's a metric how to showcase what you have anyway.
Okay. If we could jump back to the E again for a minute, and I want to talk about the relationship between the E and what's going on in the artificial intelligence area, which, as we all know, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 3 to 4 years, we all know about the AI revolution. My understanding is that AI, through the processes and the server farms and the data, number one, can use a whole bunch of energy. So I've seen estimates that in the US, by the year 2026, AI will require about 6%, AI use in the US will require about 6% of all energy usage in the US. And coming back to things on carbon and such, there are differences. I think I saw a statistic in Finland. Finland is powering its AI through 97% renewable energy, whereas in Asia, for renewable energy powering AI, it's somewhere between 8 and 15%, right? So you have different situations throughout the globe. And then in terms of water usage, these systems, these server farms, require extensive cooling. And I have seen some statistics that a little back and forth chat with a large language model, such as ChatGPT, could require a liter of water for a little back and forth chat. But at the same time, AI, through its creative, quasi-creative, discoverable techniques, can perhaps solve some of these issues as well as other environmental issues. So I'd welcome your thoughts on that subject.
Well, I hate to turn you down, but the Hungarian, or at least the companies I know here in Budapest, they are not there yet. They are not thinking about it. Their focus is right now on regulatory compliance. And obviously, and what we see as KPMG, that AI and data collection systems will be needed to actually do the reporting. So they will have to talk about this and they will have to consider this, but at the moment they are not there yet.
Is it possible that a regulatory requirement could be the relationship between energy usage or water usage and the use of an AI system? Or is that so far off?
I think can happen. I mean, last week I also read a sort of a summary of EU regulation, and I counted 54 EU regulations that are related to green and sustainability.
Only 54?
Only.
Okay.
So I think an AI can come there as well.
All right, make it 55. Julianna, it's always so interesting for me, and I think for a lot of interest, to hear how Julianna Nagy became the Julianna Nagy, and your work. Could you tell a little bit about your background and your educational and career growth?
Okay, well, to also my surprise, I finished agricultural university. I am not an economist at all, or neither, any kind of usual KPMG figure. I spent 6 years in Brussels, worked for an NGO and in a lobby, basically. And then I arrived to KPMG, started in audit, but audit of non-financial information. And since 3 years, since my background and my personal attraction to sustainability brought me to here. So at the moment, I help big companies getting ready for CSRD and getting audit ready.
Help our listeners.
Is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the requirements. So the
reporting
itself, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm also helping them to be audit ready.
Okay.
And I kind of try to teach CEOs and CFOs that it shouldn't be just a regulatory ambition for them, but rather something added value should come to the company.
Something beyond
yes.
the pure, we got to do this because the regulation requires it. So, well, that's a fascinating background. I think it shows how a company like KPMG draws from different sources and different experience and education levels to put together a team.
This is something that we put a lot of effort. So actually our sustainability team is not just economists. It's basically we have all kinds of backgrounds. And this is what we realized, that if you deal with ESG or even just the reporting, we need lawyers, we need economists, we need someone who maybe understands, the sector the company is in. So if a pharmaceutical, we need someone who is, familiar with pharmaceutical industry, and you need also engineers who kind of understand the numbers and know how to aggregate, for example, a GHG emission.
Thank you very much. Well, we're almost out of time here, but we need to dig deeper on the real Julianna Nagy. And Marcel Proust, the French writer, came up with a sort of a personality questionnaire. And I'm going to ask you some of those questions. And what I need, this is like a Rorschach test, an ink blot test. Okay, I need an immediate, quick 1 or 2 word answer. We're going to rip through these questions. You with me on this?
Yes.
Okay. Which living person do you most admire?
My mom.
What is the trait you most deplore in others?
Arrogance.
What is the quality you most like in a person?
Kindness.
Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
In Hungarian or
Whatever you want. Ish.
ESG.
ESG. Okay. Which talent that you do not have would you most like to have?
Patience would be talent.
What is your greatest extravagance?
I have piercings and tattoos. I don't know.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
To be more patient.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My son.
That's good. And then second, one of your tattoos?
I have a tattoo for him. So.
Oh, good. You covered both. What, not who, is the greatest love of your life? What?
My dog. It's a Dutch.
Nice. If you were to die and come back as a person or a thing, what would it be?
My dog.
What is your most treasured possession?
That's hard. I don't know.
What is your most marked characteristic?
Not patient.
What do you most value in your friends?
That I can call them anytime if we didn't talk for a year or
Nice.
something.
That is a true friend. I agree. Who are your favorite writers?
I mean, Agatha Christie. I
Nice.
love criminals.
Who is your hero of fiction? Perrault, not Eric Perrault. Who?
No, Poirot,
not
but
Poirot?
no, Marvel. Can I go?
Of course you have. That's good. That's good. Which historical figure do you most identify with? Which historical figure?
Sisi.
Nice. Elizabeth. Who are your heroes in real life?
My mom and my father and my aunt.
What is your greatest regret?
I don't have.
Nice. If you were to live somewhere else than where you currently live, where would you most like to live?
Portugal.
Nice. What is your motto?
Just live for the day.
Carpe diem. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
Live for the day.
Nice. Julianna of KPMG, Senior Manager, responsible for sustainability matters and ESG more generally. This has been a fantastic discussion.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate
Thank you for
it.
having me.
Thank you so much. My name's Theodore Boone. Again, I'm on the faculty at Corvinus University. And I'll leave you today with these words of Benjamin Franklin: an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Thank you.